I took a wrong turn and found a town that's not on any map. I wish I hadn't stopped. It started as a simple road trip. I had a few days off work and decided to drive across the state to visit an old friend. The plan was to take the scenic route, avoid the interstates, and enjoy the open road. I had my GPS set, snacks packed, and a playlist ready. It was supposed to be a relaxing drive. But somewhere along the way, I took a wrong turn. And that's when everything changed. I had been driving for hours when my GPS started acting up. The screen flickered, and the route kept recalculating. Frustrated, I pulled over to the side of the road to reset it. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods and the occasional farmhouse. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the road. After fiddling with the GPS for a few minutes, it finally seemed to be working again. It rerouted me down a narrow, winding road that I didn't remember seeing on the map. But I trusted the technology more than my own sense of direction, so I followed it. The road grew narrower and the trees thicker as I drove on. The sunlight faded and a thick fog began to roll in, reducing visibility to just a few feet in front of my car. I turned on my headlights and slowed down, hoping I would find a way back to the main road soon. After what felt like an eternity, the fog lifted slightly, revealing an old, rusted sign by the side of the road, "Welcome to Ravenwood." I had never heard of the place, and a quick glance at my GPS showed no record of it. Still, the idea of a small town where I could get my bearings and maybe ask for directions was appealing. I drove into Ravenwood and immediately felt a chill run down my spine. The town looked like it had been abandoned for years. The buildings were old and decaying, windows boarded up or broken, weeds grew through the cracks in the pavement, and there wasn't a single car or person in sight. I parked my car in front of what used to be a diner and got out. The air was cold and damp, and the silence was almost deafening. I decided to check the diner first, hoping to find someone who could tell me where I was and how to get back on track. The door to the diner creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and musty. The tables and chairs were covered in a thick layer of dust, and the smell of mold hung in the air. I called out, but there was no response. The place was empty. Feeling uneasy, I decided to leave and try another building. Across the street was a small grocery store. The windows were covered in grime, but I could see faint light flickering inside. I crossed the street and tried the door. It was locked. As I stood there, contemplating my next move, I heard a sound behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there, just the empty street and the fog slowly creeping back in. My heart was racing now. Something was very wrong with this place. I walked back to my car, the feeling of being watched growing stronger with each step. I decided to leave Ravenwood and find another route. But as I reached for the car door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My car tires were slashed. Panic set in. I was stranded in an abandoned town with no way out. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Desperate, I decided to search the town for a working phone or someone who could help me. I walked through the empty streets, the sense of dread growing with each step. Every building I tried was either locked or empty. The town was a ghost town, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. As I approached the town square, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. He was staring directly at me. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. When I was about 10 feet away, the man turned and walked down an alleyway. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to follow him. He was the first sign of life I had seen, and I needed answers. The alleyway was narrow and dark, the walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. The man was nowhere to be seen. As I walked deeper into the alley, I heard whispers all around me, faint and indistinct. I spun around, but there was no one there. My footsteps echoed in the narrow space, and the whispers grew louder. They seemed to be coming from all directions. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the end of the alley and find the man. But instead, I found myself in front of an old, decrepit church. The door to the church was slightly ajar, and a faint light glowed from inside. I pushed the door open and stepped in. The interior was dark and cold, the pews covered in dust and cobwebs. At the far end of the church, near the altar, I saw the man kneeling in prayer. I approached him slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silent church. As I got closer, I noticed that he was whispering something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but they sent a shiver down my spine. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling. "Can you help me? I'm lost." The man stopped whispering and slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were empty and hollow, and his face was gaunt and pale. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with those vacant eyes. I took a step back, fear gripping me. "Please, I need help," I repeated. The man stood up slowly, his movements stiff and unnatural. He pointed towards the back of the church, where a door led to what looked like a small office. Without a word, he walked towards the door and disappeared inside. I hesitated for a moment before following him. The office was small and cluttered, with old books and papers strewn everywhere. The man was standing by a desk, looking at an old rotary phone. He picked it up and handed it to me. I took the phone, relieved to finally have a way to call for help. I dialed 911, but there was no dial tone. The line was dead. I looked at the man, but he just stared at me with those empty eyes. "Is there another phone?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. He shook his head slowly and pointed to a piece of paper on the desk. I picked it up and saw that it was a map of the town. There was a red X marked on a building near the edge of town. Scribbled next to the X were the words, "Help here." I looked back at the man, but he was gone. The office door was closed, and I was alone. My hands were shaking as I folded the map and put it in my pocket. I had no choice but to go to the marked building and hope for the best. I left the church and followed the map to the edge of town. The building marked with the red X was an old factory, its windows broken and walls covered in ivy. The front door was slightly open, and I could see a faint light inside. I entered the factory, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. The light was coming from a room at the far end of the building. I made my way through the dark, empty halls, the whispers following me every step of the way. When I reached the room, I saw a group of people standing in a circle. They were dressed in the same old-fashioned clothes as the man in the church, and they were all whispering the same indistinct words. In the center of the circle was a large, ornate mirror. One of the people, a woman with long, dark hair, looked up as I entered. She smiled, but it was a cold, empty smile that sent chills down my spine. "Welcome," she said in a voice that echoed unnaturally. "We've been waiting for you." I took a step back, but the door behind me slammed shut. The people in the circle began to chant louder, their voices rising in a haunting melody. The mirror in the center of the room started to glow, a faint blue light emanating from its surface. "Please, I just want to leave," I pleaded, my voice barely audible over the chanting. The woman stepped forward, her smile never wavering. "You can't leave," she said. "Not yet. You have to see." She grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the mirror. I tried to resist, but her grip was surprisingly strong. As I got closer, I saw my reflection in the mirror, but it was distorted and twisted. My face looked gaunt and hollow, my eyes empty and lifeless. "What is this?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. The woman leaned in close, her breath cold against my ear. "This is the truth," she whispered. "This is who you are." I tried to pull away, but the chanting grew louder, and the mirror's light intensified. I felt a cold, dark presence envelop me, and my vision started to blur. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my reflection in the mirror, smiling back at me with that same empty, hollow smile. When I woke up, I was lying on the side of the road, my car parked nearby. The sun was rising and the fog had lifted. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Was it all just a dream? I checked my car, and to my relief, the tires were intact. My phone had a signal, and the GPS was working fine. I quickly got in the car and drove away, not daring to look back. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The memories of Ravenwood haunted me, and I couldn't get the image of my distorted reflection out of my mind. Eventually, I reached my friend's house, but I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Who would believe me? Days passed, but the experience lingered in my thoughts. One night, I found an old box of family photos while rummaging through the attic. As I shifted through the pictures, one in particular caught my eye. It was a sepia-toned photograph of a small town that looked eerily familiar. In the background, I could see a sign that read, "Ravenwood." In the foreground stood a group of people dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces hauntingly vacant. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized one of the faces. It was the woman from the factory, her cold, empty smile unmistakable. Standing next to her, with the same hollow eyes, was a younger version of the man from the church. And there, in the middle of the group, was a boy with a familiar face. It was me. I dropped the photo, my hands trembling. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Ravenwood wasn't just a random sinister town. It was part of my past, a forgotten piece of my history. And somehow it had called me back. To this day, I still don't know what Ravenwood truly is or why it isn't on any map. But one thing is certain, it's part of me, and I'll never escape its haunting presence. As I look into the mirror now, I sometimes catch a glimpse of that empty, hollow smile. And I wonder if one day, I'll find myself back in Ravenwood, where I truly belong. We found a way to listen to the afterlife, and what we heard terrified us. I was working as an audio technician at the time. Mostly freelance, I did odd jobs for films, music artists, and even a few well-known podcasts. When I was approached by a company specializing in R&D, I initially thought they'd made a mistake. Their email was rather mysterious. We're looking for an experienced audio technician for one of our projects. We've listened to your samples, and your sound processing skills in particular seem to be exactly what we're looking for. Your participation will be remunerated up to $3,000 for 3 days of work. If you are interested, please reply within 48 hours. As the nature of this project is highly confidential, no information will be passed on to you about the nature of this project before you sign an NDA. To avoid wasting my time with a hoax, I asked for a face-to-face meeting at their company headquarters. To my surprise, they immediately agreed, and the next day I had an appointment at their premises at 9 a.m. I announced myself at reception, and a woman in a white scientist's coat who introduced herself as Elizabeth invited me to accompany her to her office. After signing the NDA and my contract, she led me through a maze of corridors to where I would be working. You'll soon understand why we had you sign a confidentiality agreement. The research we do here is highly confidential, and we've already made a major discovery that just needs one last push, she said, turning to me with a smile. I hope I can help you in the way you expect, I said, still in the dark about the mission I was about to be given. We arrived in a spacious room already occupied by another man, also wearing a white coat, and whom I assumed to be his superior by the authoritative look in his eyes and his advanced age. Mr. Meltran, I presume, Darren Dahlon, Chief Scientist, delighted to have you with us. Please sit down. I sat down opposite them on a table that was empty, except for a strange object whose origin and function I couldn't account for. Mr. Meltran, I'm not going to beat about the bush. You're going to be involved in the most important project of your life for the next 3 days. Do you see this device? He asked, pointing to the object in the center of the table. This device is what I've been working on for the last 20 years of my life. You see, I've always been certain that there was life after death, and this device, I'm convinced, is what will enable me to prove it. I inspected the object more closely. At first glance, it didn't look much. About the size of a laptop and just under 12 inches high, it was entirely black, and only a circle, like a loudspeaker, in the center of the upwardly exposed face was visible. It was connected to a portable keyboard that sat right in front of the scientist. We can't reveal precisely how it works, but to put it simply, this device allows us to listen to frequencies that until now had never been reached, frequencies that we are certain correspond to the beyond. You'll understand the problem we're facing, Elizabeth said, pressing a key on the keyboard in front of her and looking at a screen I assumed was on the other side of the device. Instantly, a sound from elsewhere pierced my eardrums. The sound was unmistakably high-pitched and seemed static, despite the fact that I had the impression of hearing pitch variations without being able to distinguish them. Elizabeth finally cut the sound with a grimace after pressing a few keys. Mr. Meltran, we're not asking you to believe us about our discovery. All we're asking is that you work hard to analyze and filter this sound and turn it into something usable. I was circumspect, but they both seemed very serious. You really think there's something in that sound? What do you think it is? A silence fell. Elizabeth looked at her superior out of the corner of her eye without intervening. Yes, Mr. Mitran. We think there's something in the sound, as you say. Your work begins today, and Elizabeth will show you the equipment at your disposal. I set to work. I was allowed to use all the equipment in the lab, computers and all, including the device in question, but I couldn't take anything home or work from home. Everything had to be done on site, and every second had to be recorded by cameras and microphones. I recorded a sample of the sound and started by trying to filter it. I'd already worked on sound that was cut, corrupted, of poor quality or whatever, and I used every technique I knew to try and clean it up. I spent the entirety first day on it, to no avail. The second day I continued in this direction, not knowing what else to do. My attempts became more and more desperate. I honestly couldn't see how they expected me to get anything out of that uniform, shrill sound. I decided to concentrate on my ears and listen to the sound produced by the device over and over again. There was definitely something strange about it. I don't know how to explain it, but the more I listened to it, the more my breathing quickened, as did my heart, and part of my brain screamed at me to end it, or run away. So much so that I was beginning to fear continuing to listen to it. After all, it was supposed to be a sound from beyond, according to them, although I wondered if this scientist hadn't just gone mad trying to find an answer to his obsession. The second day ended like the first. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound kept echoing in my head. It was as if by listening to it over and over again, it had become imprinted on me. I had the impression of discovering new facets, new variations. It was as if the sound was still happening, but in my head, and I couldn't stop it. I turned over in bed for the 15th time and stared at the ceiling, and the vision that came to me stunned me. At first I thought I was imagining shapes moving because of the darkness. But like the sound, the more I concentrated on what I was seeing, the clearer it became. There were dozens and dozens of faces, their horrified expressions distorting their features as they blended into the ceiling and seemed to be trying to break out, to extricate themselves from the solid matter. As the faces tried to push against the darkness to get out, I could hear the sound in my ears getting louder and louder, sharper and sharper. My heart was beating so fast I was afraid it would suddenly stop. I could hardly breathe. They were there. They were coming out, and for some unknown reason, I was certain that if they reached me, they'd take me with them. With that thought, I jumped out of bed and in 2 steps reached the light switch in my room and looked up. There was nothing there. And the sound, though persistent, was a distant echo in my head. On the third and last day, I sat down at my workstation with dark circles under my eyes. I'd spent the rest of the night on my feet, trying to think of a solution. I approached the device again, and after a moment's hesitation, my instincts screaming at me not to press the key, I turned it on. Again, that shrill sound so unique, flat, and endless. That's when it hit me. I remembered the first impression I'd had when I heard it for the very first time. A feeling of missing something behind the uniform appearance of the sound. What if there were so many sounds that the mush coming out of them made them impossible to discern? I stood in front of my computer and spent the rest of the day isolating and slowing down the sound to an extreme level. It was 7 p.m., and I was finally ready to do a test. At the same time, Elizabeth entered the room. "The time you were given is almost at 0, she said with a compassionate smile. "I think I've found the solution. Are you ready?" Her eyes widened, and she sat down on a chair next to me in silence. I started the modified recording. I never imagined I'd hear what I heard. Screams, an incredible number of heart-rending cries from an infinite number of people, men and women of all ages. Elizabeth's face turned pale, her gaze locked with mine, both her hands trembling slightly on her frail legs. The screams continued to fill the room, each passing second seeming to increase the pressure. I stopped the recording. My superior is going to want to hear this and apply it directly to the device to get a real-time translation. Can you do that? She seemed terrified by her own request, but like me, she didn't really have a choice. We had to go through with the project. "Sure, Elizabeth. I should be able to do it in 10 minutes. Just give me a little time to grab something to eat and drink in the cafeteria, and I'll bring something back for you too." Despite the fact that the old chief scientist had heard the modified recording, he still asked me, as Elizabeth had planned, to apply the filter to the live sound. And when the device came on, indeed we heard again the screams of what we assumed to be human beings. And it wasn't the same sounds over and over again. It sounded like it was constantly changing. It was as if the sound itself was alive. The two scientists chatted quietly at the other end of the room, and finally came back to me to congratulate me on my work. They both looked satisfied, but I sensed they were still in shock at the implications of all this. I told them that to finish, I just needed a little more time to refine the filtering and write down the method for them to follow once I'd gone. I spent the rest of the night working, and after a while, I realized that it was past midnight. I was just finishing tidying up my desk when suddenly the shouting stopped. That's when I realized that the device had been on all this time. I couldn't believe it, but I had to believe it, because now it wasn't screams I was hearing, but the slow breathing and exhaling of someone or something. After a while, it said something in a language I didn't know, but which I assumed was something close to Latin. Then nothing. I switched the machine off and on again, once, twice, 10 times. Only a deafening silence, and my jerky breathing filled the room. I explained what had happened before leaving. Fortunately for me, as it was all recorded, I had proof that I had nothing to reproach myself for, and they had a clear record of what the voice had said. I spent weeks trying to make sense of the sentence myself, but the more time passed, the more the words escaped me. After a while, I simply got on with my life, but the experience left an indelible mark on me. Even today, in the silence of the night, I sometimes feel as if I can hear a high-pitched tone echoing deep inside me. And I know that if I concentrate just a little bit on it, I'll hear again the horrific screams of that endless human tide. There's a forest near our town where people go missing. My daughter came back, but she's not the same. I can't stop pacing. The old wooden floor creaks with every step, a constant reminder of how empty our house feels. The smell of burnt coffee hangs in the air. I forgot to turn off the machine again. Outside, the wind blows through the trees, making the colorful autumn leaves dance. My name's John Prescott. I'm 42, teach history at the local high school, and right now, I'm living every parent's worst nightmare. Our town, Pelham, is the kind of place you see on postcards. White picket fences, cute little shops, and a church so old it was around before America was even a country. Tourists love it here, especially in the fall when the trees turn all orange and red. But Pelham has its secrets. I should know, I've spent years studying our town's history. There are stories that don't make it into the guidebooks. Whispers about Blackwood Forest that surrounds us. Strange things have happened there over the years. I never thought my family would become part of those stories. John, my wife's voice snaps me out of my thoughts. Sarah stands in the doorway, looking like she hasn't slept in days. To be honest, neither of us has. Anything new? I shake my head. Not yet. The police chief said they're bringing in some expert from Boston, but I don't finish the sentence. We both know what I'm thinking. Sarah sits on the couch, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I keep expecting her to call or text. I sit next to her, putting my arm around her shoulders. For a moment, we're quiet, both lost in memories of our daughter, Emily. Emily on her first day of school, all smiles and pigtails. Emily winning the science fair, grinning from ear to ear. Emily last week, laughing at my terrible jokes. Emily yelling that she hated me before running out the door. I should have gone after her, I say quietly. Sarah squeezes my hand. We both thought she'd come back. She always did before. But not this time. Not after our stupid fight about a sleepover. It's Chief Parker, looking worried. John, Sarah, can I come in? We need to talk. In the kitchen, Sarah makes fresh coffee while I sit across from the chief. What's going on, Dave? I ask. Did you find something? He sighs, taking off his hat. Not exactly, but something's happened. You're not gonna like it. Sarah sets down 3 coffee mugs, her hands shaking a little. Just tell us. We've had to stop the search parties in Blackwood Forest, he says. What? Why? I'm on my feet before I know it. Chief Parker holds up a hand. Please, sit down. There's more. I sit, feeling like the room is spinning. Sarah grabs my hand under the table. 3 of our volunteers have gone missing, the chief continues. Just vanished, like Emily. My mouth goes dry. That's not possible. It can't be. But even as I say it, I remember the old stories I've read, the ones about people disappearing in the forest. There's something else, Chief Parker says, his voice low. Something strange happened last night. We found someone wandering at the edge of town. Someone who went missing a long time ago. A chill runs down my spine. I think about the stories I've researched, about people coming back, different. Suddenly I feel dizzy. The kitchen seems to blur around me. For a split second I think I hear Emily's voice, far away but clear. "Daddy, where are you?" Then everything snaps back to normal. The chief and Sarah are looking at me, worried. "Are you okay?" Sarah asks. I nod, but I'm not okay, because in that weird moment I saw something. A dark cave, and Emily was there, smiling, but something wasn't right about her eyes. "We need to go back to the forest," I say, my voice shaky but determined. Now. Because whatever's happening in Blackwood Forest, whatever took my daughter, I have a feeling it's not over yet. The drive to Blackwood Forest is tense. Sarah sits beside me, her knuckles white as she grips the door handle. Chief Parker follows in his cruiser, lights flashing but sirens off. The last thing we need is to draw more attention. As we near the forest's edge, I spot something moving in the shadows. I slam on the brakes, causing Sarah to lurch forward. "John, what?" She starts, but then she sees it too. A figure stands at the tree line, unnaturally still. It's a man, or what used to be a man. His skin is pale, almost translucent in the fading light, but it's his eyes that make my stomach churn. They're fixed on us, unblinking. "Oh my God," Sarah whispers, her voice trembling. The man's head turns towards us, the movement too smooth, like a camera panning. For a moment he just stares. Then, as if pulled by some invisible force, he begins to walk towards the road, towards town. His gait is odd, each step precisely the same length as the last. Chief Parker pulls up beside us, rolling down his window. "Don't get out of the car," he warns. "We've seen this before. They can't seem to enter the town limits." As if to prove his point, the man suddenly stops at the faded "Welcome to Pelham" sign. He sways on his feet, looking confused. "What do you mean, they?" Sarah asks. "How many are there?" The chief's expression is grim. "We've counted 7 so far, all missing persons from the last few decades, and all changed." I watch as the man paces along the invisible boundary, his movements becoming more agitated. "What happens if they try to cross?" "You don't want to know," Parker says quietly, but as the words leave his mouth, a police car rounds the corner, lights blazing. The new officer must not have gotten the memo about our town's strange new residents. He pulls over and steps out, approaching the agitated man. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need help?" What happens next will haunt my nightmares for years to come. The moment the officer's hand crosses the town line, the changed man lets out a sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a word, but something in between. His body goes rigid, every muscle tensing at once. He lunges at the officer, his movements a blur. Chief Parker is out of his car in an instant, shouting warnings. But it's too late. The changed man is grappling with the officer, trying to drag him across the line. His strength seems inhuman, his fingers leaving bruises wherever they touch. It takes 3 of them to finally subdue the man, dragging him back into the forest where he immediately calms, becoming almost docile again. The officer is shaken but alive. As the paramedics check him over, I overhear him muttering, "His skin, it wasn't right. Like touching a mannequin, but alive." I turn to Sarah, seeing my own horror reflected in her eyes. "Emily," she whispers. "John, what if?" I grab her hand, squeezing perhaps too tightly. We don't know anything yet. Emily could still be okay. But deep down, a cold dread is settling in my stomach. Because I remember the stories now. Stories I'd dismissed as superstition and folklore. Stories of people returning from the forest changed, unable to rejoin society. What if those stories were true? What if whatever changed these people has my daughter? As twilight deepens, casting long shadows across the road, Chief Parker approaches our car. "We can't go in tonight," he says, his voice heavy with regret. "It's too dangerous in the dark. We'll start again at first light." I want to argue, to demand we go in now. Every moment we wait is another moment Emily is lost in that forest. But I know he's right. Blackwood Forest is treacherous enough in daylight. At night, it's a death trap. As we drive home, the trees seem to loom over us, branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I can't shake the feeling that something is watching us from the darkness. That night, as Sarah finally falls into an uneasy sleep, I sit at my desk, poring over Old Town records. There has to be a pattern, some clue we've missed. My eyes burn with exhaustion, but every time I close them, I see Emily's face. Just as I'm about to give up, a name catches my eye. Elizabeth Proctor, age 9, missing for 3 days in 1793. Found in a cave, eyes unseeing, speaking words not of this earth. My heart races. A cave, just like in my vision. Outside, a wolf howls, long and mournful, but underneath that familiar sound, I swear I hear something else. A high, keening wail that raises the hair on the back of my neck. It sounds almost human. Dawn can't come soon enough. The forest looms before us, a wall of green and shadow. The morning mist clings to the ground, weaving between the trees like ghostly fingers. I take a deep breath, tasting the damp earth and decaying leaves on my tongue. Our search party is small, just me, Sarah, Chief Parker, and 2 of his most trusted deputies. No one else wanted to risk entering Blackwood after what happened yesterday. Stay close, Parker warns as we step past the tree line. And whatever you do, don't lose sight of each other. The forest swallows us whole. The canopy above is so thick that it might as well be twilight down here. Our flashlights cut weak paths through the gloom. We walk for what feels like hours, calling Emily's name until our voices are hoarse. The forest seems to absorb the sound, muffling our cries. More than once, I swear I hear a response, a faint "daddy" carried on the wind, but when we rush towards it, we find nothing. "John," Sarah whispers, tugging on my sleeve. "Look." At first, I don't see it. Then my eyes adjust, and I feel the blood drain from my face. Carved into a massive oak tree is a symbol, a spiral with strange angular marks branching off it. It looks old, the edges worn smooth by time and weather. "I've seen this before," I murmur, reaching out to trace the lines with my fingers. The bark feels unnaturally warm beneath my touch. Suddenly, a sharp pain lances through my head. I stumble back, spots dancing in my vision. A cave mouth, yawning wide in the hillside. Emily sitting cross-legged at the entrance, smiling serenely. Her eyes, somehow wrong, turning to look at me. "Come find me, Daddy." I blink, and the vision is gone. Sarah is shaking me, her face pale with worry. "John? John, what happened?" I open my mouth to respond, but before I can, an unnatural silence falls over the forest. The constant background noise of birds and insects suddenly stops, leaving an eerie void. Chief Parker raises his gun, eyes darting between the trees. "We should go back," he says, voice tight with fear. But I can't. Not now. "The cave," I gasp out. "We need to find the cave." Sarah looks at me like I've lost my mind. Maybe I have, but I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that Emily is in that cave. We press on, deeper into Blackwood. The trees seem to press closer, branches reaching out like claws. Twice more we experience that unnatural silence, each time lasting longer than before. Then, as we round a dense thicket, we see it. A hill rises before us, and at its base, a dark opening gapes like a wound in the earth. "Emily," Sarah cries, starting forward. I grab her arm, holding her back, because there, sitting at the mouth of the cave, is our daughter. She looks just like she did the day she ran away. Same clothes, same messy ponytail, but when she turns to look at us, my heart stops. Her eyes are wrong. Not white or glowing, but somehow off, as if they're focused on something just behind us. And her smile, it's too wide, too still, like a photograph rather than a living expression. "You found me," she says, but her lips barely move. The voice seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Emily," I choke out. "Baby, are you okay?" She tilts her head, the movement too smooth, like a puppet on strings. "Okay, I'm wonderful, Daddy. I've never been better." I take a step forward, but Chief Parker grabs my shoulder. "Wait," he hisses. "Something's not right." As if in response, Emily stands. Her movements are all wrong, too fluid, as if she's underwater. "Don't you want to come see?" she asks, gesturing to the cave behind her. "It's beautiful in here. You'll never want to leave." Sarah lets out a choked sob beside me. I squeeze her hand, trying to project a confidence I don't feel. "Emily," I say, fighting to keep my voice steady, "we need you to come home now. Please." For a moment, something flickers in those strange eyes, a flash of our real daughter. Then it's gone, replaced by an expression of serene blankness. "Home? The word is flat, emotionless. I am home. She takes a step forward, and in that moment, I notice something that turns my blood to ice. Emily's feet don't quite touch the ground. She's hovering, ever so slightly, above the forest floor. My vision blurs, tears or terror, I'm not sure which. Because now we have a choice to make. Do we try to bring our daughter home, knowing what happened to the others who returned? Or do we leave her here, lost in whatever dark magic has taken hold of Blackwood Forest? As Emily takes another step towards us, moving in a way that's just slightly off, I realize with a sinking heart that we may not have a choice at all. The forest has her now, and it might not be willing to let her go. It's been 3 months since that day in Blackwood Forest. Life in Pelham has changed irrevocably. We've become a town of closed curtains and hushed whispers, eyes always darting to the tree line. Sometimes in the pale light of dawn or the long shadows of dusk, we see her. Emily, or what used to be Emily, standing at the edge of town. She never crosses the invisible boundary, never tries to enter. She just watches. Her appearance is almost normal now, but there's always something off. Sometimes she stands too still, not even swaying in the breeze. Other times she moves in ways that defy natural motion, her limbs bending at impossible angles. But it's her eyes that haunt me most, blank and unseeing, yet somehow all-knowing. Sarah spends most days in bed, lost in a fog of grief and antidepressants. I've thrown myself into research, poring over ancient texts and folklore, desperate for answers. The government has set up a discreet research facility on the outskirts of town, scientists and paranormal experts working around the clock to understand what's happening in Blackwood. We've learned some things. The symbol we found in the forest appears in obscure occult writings, linked to entities that exist outside our understanding of reality. There are legends of similar forests in other parts of the world, places where the veil between worlds is thin. But knowledge isn't enough. We need a way to reverse this, to bring Emily and the others back, to make them human again. Last week, one of the researchers managed to take a skin sample from one of the changed ones. Under the microscope, the cells were like nothing they'd ever seen before, constantly shifting and rearranging themselves. It's the first real breakthrough we've had. The town has changed too. People speak in whispers, afraid that talking too loudly about the forest might draw its attention. Children are kept indoors after dark. The school where I teach is half empty most days, parents too afraid to let their kids out of sight. There have been more disappearances, not many, but enough to keep the fear alive. Each time, the pattern is the same. Someone ventures too close to the forest's edge, and they're never seen again. At least, not as themselves. The changed ones, Emily included, have developed a routine. During the day, they retreat deep into the woods, but at night they emerge, lining up along the town's border. They never try to cross, never speak. They just stand there, watching, waiting. For what, we don't know. Is it possible to save Emily? To undo whatever the forest did to her? I have to believe it is, because the alternative, accepting that our daughter is gone forever, is too painful to bear. So we keep working, keep searching, keep hoping. And every evening, I walk to the edge of town. I stand there as the sun sets, looking at the daughter who no longer recognizes me. Sometimes I swear I see a flicker of recognition in those alien eyes, a ghost of the smile I used to know. "I'm here, Emily," I whisper into the gathering darkness, "and I'm not giving up on you. Ever." As night falls and Emily retreats into the shadows of Blackwood, I turn back toward town. Tomorrow, we'll try again. We'll keep trying, no matter how long it takes, because somewhere in that forest, lost in whatever madness has taken hold of her, our daughter is waiting to be found. And I won't rest until we bring her home. But sometimes in the dead of night, when the wind carries strange whispers from the forest, I wonder, are we trying to save Emily, or is Emily trying to change us? The forest is patient, it can wait, and it's always, always hungry.